Hello and welcome. Welcome to the Dr. Lake Show. This is Dr. Paola Lake. Here for another podcast. Looking forward to it. And I'm really interested in today's topic. And I'm also hoping that speaking to communities that we're able to put some of the news aside, because there's been so many things happening in the news recently. So I'm happy to divert from all the stuff going on in the world, talking about something else that I think is really important that we talk about. I think we need to probably talk about this even more than we do. And I'm more than pleased to have a guest here today, Maeve Obern, who is a career and transition coach. I can also say she's done some wonderful coaching for myself. So thank you, Maeve, for that. And so happy you're here.
Thank you so much. I'm honored to be here. I've been listening to your podcast, and they are so informative and easy to digest, so easy to learn from.
Thank you. That actually is really nice to hear. I appreciate that. And I can say also to give you a little bit of acknowledgement there, Maeve, because I contacted you because of repeated delays of getting my podcast started. And then I reached you, and you have been really helpful in doing some of what we talk about around goal setting and accountability. And I really appreciate that. I want you to know that.
Thank you so much.
And I also have Dylan here, always my tech here on the background, always making sure everything goes just tickety-boo. That's Dylan Soriano Powling. Hi, Dylan.
Hello, Paula. Hello, Maeve.
Hi, Dylan.
Always great to have him in the background. He's my, we talked earlier, he's my technical security blanket. So I'm always very grateful for his presence. So today, you and I had discussed the concept or the conversation about ageism, which is something that you've taken a recent interest. I don't know if it's recent or if it's been something you've been observing for a while, but that is something yes, go ahead.
It's actually something I've been observing for a long while.
Okay. It launched your inquiry into this. What is it that you've noticed that sort of spurred these questions about ageism?
It was actually when I was working as in the nonprofit sector, and donors would come in to see me and talk to me about leaving a legacy and the challenges they had in making others around them, their community, understand the whys. And often they would come in quite distraught that their community, whether it was their children, their friends, would really talk to them as if they were children again. And you're not thinking properly. You're not thinking straight. You don't want to leave this money to this place or that place. And it often came down to that they would talk about feeling prejudiced, about feeling prejudice given to them from others because of their age.
Right,
they were treated differently.
Yes. Yes, and I think, and what's interesting is I wonder if the inherent negative, at least we're talking also on a perceptual level, because not only perceptual, even my own observations, that there's a pre-existing negative perception we have already about people that are older, that's being out there, that's sort of floating in the air.
Exactly. When we look at what the definition of ageism is, it's really prejudicial attitudes, discriminatory practices, or institutional policies, and it really is stereotyping and discriminating individuals on the basis of their age or our perception of their age.
So, and really, with that definition, that could even apply. And you had mentioned that in previous conversations we've had, it could actually apply to even ageism, prejudice against younger people. Right?
Exactly. We think of ageism as a prejudice against older people, but in fact, it occurs with younger people when you think about even advertising jobs. They're looking for a mature person. That's one of those keywords that you look for and say,
Yes.
So somebody of 23 may not, in the advertiser's mind, be mature.
Yes.
So, it serves sort of economic purposes.
Yes.
And legitimizes inequality.
Yes, and well, on an anecdotal level, I can tell you, and I think I might have mentioned this in the past, but I come from an Italian culture, and in that culture, the seniors were to be very much respected, to be cared for, which I certainly think there's it's a bit different here in North America. I don't know what observations you've made, and you also come from Ireland and you've lived in the Middle East, so you might have some sense of what you've seen. What have you noticed, Maeve?
Well, I've noticed here our Indigenous cultures still have that respect for their elders, as they use that label or nomenclature for the older generation. Asian populations have also had a lot of respect for the elderly, the people who've gone before.
Right.
Western society, I think, perhaps even in the last 30 years, there's less respect with this sort of age of reaching for the stars, want, individualism. We've forgotten what community is about. And community really is about the intergeneration of families and wisdom.
It's a connection between them. I actually brought a friend to Italy. This was a number of years ago, and she made an observation when we were there, as I was with my uncle, they were in their 60s and 70s, and we went to a coffee shop. But she observed this throughout the course of our trip. There were these couple of younger girls. They started engaging in conversation with my uncles, who was, of course, older and very comfortable, very at ease, not feeling like there's this huge wall. And she actually made an observation and said, I've noticed since coming here that the younger people seem to really just feel at ease and more engaged. Do you think that we keep too many segregations between the different age groups?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So how do we do that?
And
what
I think we're worse off because of it, and we do it in many ways.
Yeah.
I think I said to you previously that ageism is an inside job often.
Yes.
And we do it to ourselves as well as to others.
Oh,
so
huge.
Often when we think about getting old, as it were, it's often in a negative way. We say things like, "Oh, I forgot all about it's my old age. I must be getting old. My memory's going."
Yeah.
We talk about our aches and pains. Oh, it's because I'm getting old, and that constant refrain to ourselves.
Yes.
What we say to ourselves, we actually become.
I agree 100%. Yes. It has a huge impact. Those preconceived expectations of ourselves actually shape what we start to interpret, and we usually relate it to our age. Might not have to do with our age. We might be exhausted because we've been overworked, or there could be something tied to health issues, but the fact that we tie it to age is always interesting. It almost disqualifies whether someone's taking care of their health or whether there's other factors contributing, right? We immediately you think it creates a passivity in us?
Exactly. And, when we look at the outside world, the marketing towards youth and vitality and how much better it is to be younger,
Yes.
to look younger, and particularly for women, I think.
Huge.
That is really huge. Yeah.
Well, because
we talk about mature.
Yeah.
Go on.
No, I'm just thinking about, right now people even lose jobs because they don't have a certain age, right? That, I know newscasters at one time, once they reached a certain age, the women were no longer really as viable. I don't know how that holds today.
I think that's changing. I think
Yeah.
it's changing basically because of perceptions. I think the baby boomers too, as they're coming into the older population, are ensuring that those stereotypes don't continue. It always interests me. We talk about men becoming mature, and when we look at older women, we don't use those sort of nice words.
Yeah.
And yet,
Yes.
we just touching on world affairs right now.
Yes.
The U.S. president is going to be the oldest president in the history of the U.S. And he'll be 78. And this is a man with wisdom and experience.
Yes.
That is going to run the United States for the next 4 years. And it's fascinating to me. I read an article on a new book recently by Dr. Gupta, who is a medical doctor in the States, Sanjay Gupta, who talks about keeping sharp and building a better brain at any age.
Yes.
And we can improve and get better as we age.
Absolutely. I mean, when I actually had that thought too about the president, and I thought, well, Jesus, if you can be almost 80 and run a country. I mean, if you actually think about it. And what do we say about ourselves when we're 80? What does the average person resign themselves to by the time they're 80? If we have, and that's why I actually really love to see someone in that age group who is functional and still is considered a person of influence.
Exactly. When we look at our own negative attitudes that have been built up as we age, and often it starts in our 20s. Sort of the 30s is really when those impressions really start to stick.
Yes.
People with negative attitudes about aging, particularly health negative, they may live 7.58 years less than those with better attitudes.
Wow. Interesting.
Yeah.
So let's change our attitudes. And I actually think that's why I think this kind of conversation matters, because it needs to start from us, does it not? Like, as just a general population, we need to be dialoguing in a different way about getting older. I can tell you, as part of my practice, I absolutely agree. I think especially for women, there's actual fear that starts to happen. You look at self-esteem getting knocked down, because as soon as you're older, I remember actually talking to one woman, and she had just turned 50, and she made a comment about herself as feeling very irrelevant. And that's 50, right? That's not even, we're not talking senior. but
Yes.
internally, that's what she was experiencing.
Yeah. Yeah. And often it's at that age, around 50, that people start to feel societal pressure about aging, whether it's in work or in their personal lives.
Right.
They may be passed over for promotion, or it might be suggested that they don't attend educational events, because they're probably thinking about retirement and it'll tire them out.
Wow.
There's remarks. The remarks continue to come about, sort of aging from colleagues and or other workers, and they come out as pretending to be a joke. Sort of wondering about, have you thought about your retirement plans, or
Wow.
Sort of taking time to print out a document or something, or learn a new technology. Those are sort of the subtle side remarks
Right.
that feed into that negativity and self-negativity.
So what, I think, when unpacking this, there is probably a number of different effects. And one of them, like you said, is getting passed over for promotions or getting hired. I know that some people, and especially today, and if they've lost their jobs, I've heard people in their 50s and 60s telling me or that they don't think they're getting the jobs because of their age, or themselves feeling more hopeless because of their age and themselves not seeing themselves as viable. But even as far as starting something new, did you read that article on this 80-year-old woman who is getting her PhD?
Yes.
Yes.
And the one of the biggest groups of people starting new businesses are people in their 60s and 70s.
Brilliant.
Right now.
That is, I didn't know that. So is that the largest group right now?
That was the largest group in the U.S. last year, so 2019-20. Yeah.
My gosh. Okay, that is an inspirational statistic. I like that. Okay, so
exactly.
yeah.
Yeah. I know there are many authors who didn't start their careers writing until they had reached their 60s and 70s.
Wow.
And it's so important on our own self.
Yes.
Ageism, and feeling the target of ageism.
Yes.
It can cause cardiovascular stress, let alone sort of lowering self-worth. It can lead to decreased productivity and, depression,
Oh, sure.
social isolation. So, there are a lot of tiny little side effects that we don't think about when we come out with little jokes, per se.
It is in our conversation. I mean, I've heard lots of conversations about people, this impression as they get older, I don't want to be the lonely cat lady. You might have heard that one as a stereotype fear. I did watch. I've sort of lost my track on that right now. So let's pass that one, shall we? But there we go. And I'm not going to attribute that to my age. I will not do that. No. But
good.
So yeah, I think it's a major issue right now. And one of the things I thought about is I thought there's implicit versus explicit ageism. So on the one hand, the pursuit of youth may be tied to our inherent fears of aging, which might be getting older, getting sick, whatever that might be. But I think it's also tied to perhaps feeling worthy in the eyes of society. I don't know that it's all,
Mm-hmm.
in just driven by fear of the external decline as much as it might be also due to the fear that now we will not be viewed with the same value. I don't know what thoughts you have about that, Maeve.
I agree. I think the fear of being unworthy, of no use to society. I can remember a gentleman telling me a story about applying for a job, and he had moved country. He'd immigrated from another place, and where he had been the head of the department, very senior VP role, and coming here and applying for a teaching role that was perhaps slightly low, somewhat lower than his previous role, and being told at 54 he was too old to go away.
Wow.
And
wow.
the feeling of, as he said, I felt unseen. I felt the lowest of the low, that I was no longer a good part of society, somebody who could give and donate to society anymore.
That's so unfortunate. Are you aware of policies? Do we have policies? I mean, we know prejudice and discrimination is not well regarded, right? I know that we try to recommend no discrimination in our hiring practices. Is there any oversight for that, or is there any accountability for that when people do that?
Yes, there is. I mean, as you say, within policy, within our government rules and regulations, of course, there you have to actually stand up and say this and complain
Right.
that this is ageism.
Yes.
You can, here in British Columbia, we have the Employment Standards of Provincial Human Rights Tribunal that we can go to
Right.
if we feel that we have been discriminated or about for a job or in a particular role. So there are some recourse for people who feel that they are being discriminated against.
And do you think they
However,
actually do it? Do they actually, like your friend who had told you or about how he felt kind of not viable at that point, right? Do they actually do it?
Yeah. No.
Right.
Often people won't do it. They don't
Yeah.
want to upset the apple cart. And part of that is also the shame that
Yeah.
they're getting old.
Yes. Yeah, I think that is very unfortunate.
Yeah, it's tied to that fear. And we have fear of aging in that we see how we, I call it warehouse our elderly,
Yes.
our elderly people. We have fear of mental illness as you age, Alzheimer's,
Yes.
dementia,
Yes.
all of these things. And yet, when we sort of look at our lifestyles, even in our 40s and 50s, we can make subtle changes. If we think about what do I want to be like when I'm 80 or
Yes.
90, how do I want to feel?
Yes.
And start the work, even at 50, 55. Okay, I've got to change my dietary habits. I can go for a walk, 30 minutes a day, whether it's one cell walk or 3 10-minute walks, can improve cardiovascular health. I think it's around 40%.
Wow. So so in a way it's like let's develop a sense that we can be agents of change for our own life instead of being passive about it. And one of the things I do, which I also open it up for people to do, I love looking for stories of exceptions because the exceptions are what inspire me and tell me that there's other possibilities, such as the 80-year-old bodybuilder. I don't know if you'd seen that woman. She looked phenomenal.
Oh, that woman is amazing.
Phenomenal.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I remember hearing I don't know if it was a 100-yard run. He was 104 years old that he, within, a number of seconds, mind you, he wasn't racing to come in number one, but he still ran remarkably for a man in that age group. And I'll tell you, I was running a marathon. I don't know if I told you this, Maeve. This was years ago. I was running a marathon, and
Hmm.
beside me, I was running with an 80-year-old who was running the marathon. And
Oh my
I
goodness.
and we started engaging in conversation while we're running.
Hmm.
And I turned to him and I said, it's amazing, by the way, you're running. I said, when did you start running? It's amazing you can actually run and talk. I had these conversations. I said,
Exactly. You know.
when did you start doing this running? When did you start? He said he started in his 70s. I actually then later
Mm,
had read an article about a man who started running in his 70s. I wondered if that was him. I never did catch his name.
hmm.
But those things stick with me because I'm like, first you have to believe that you can run a marathon,
Hmm.
and so that you can be fit before you even launch into something like that.
Right.
Yeah. So
Right.
those are amazing stories.
Those stories are really amazing, and we can take inspiration from them. I
Hmm.
think, part of the challenge for each of us is really, as we age, not to see ourselves as a victim,
Yes. Yeah.
um, looking at ourselves in light of what we've accomplished, how much we've grown, what wisdom can we impart to others.
Yes. Do you not believe, or at least I think so, that it needs to be more converse. We need to change these underlying beliefs. We need to have more conversations about it, in terms of making some of these changes. The only thing I see as a barrier is when I look at our youthism and our striving to be as young as we possibly can be. I understand it. There's lots of energy tied to it and vitality that we want to hang on to as we get older. But that there's also these counter forces that are getting blocking our ability to do that. There is huge revenue gained from having people feel that getting older is a bad thing. If you look at
Oh,
uh,
yeah.
cosmetic industry,
Mm-hmm.
surgery, all the look at all those creams and products that are there. And if we were
Mm-hmm.
to change that dialogue, would people be pursuing it in the same way? Do you not think there's some force there that's making it challenging for us as a culture to change that?
I agree. I think there's this economic driver, whether it's TV, computer, social media, wherever you get your information. It's constantly um, looking at youth. Very few of um, general ads will have an older person, unless, of course, it's cleaning
Yes.
or it's for an elder product.
Yeah.
And yet, when you look at those, they don't really reflect who we are as a society or how society looks in
Yes.
our window.
Yeah.
But we buy into it. We buy into it's important for us to look young. It's important. That vanity and fear again comes into play.
Yeah.
And of course, marketing is very good
Oh,
at
huge.
playing on those
Huge.
emotions and fears. Yeah.
Well, because if we were, even if that industry remained as it is, perhaps if
Mm-hmm.
we were to um, keep the sense of being of value and of worth in society, regardless of your age, if that was the message that we repeatedly communicated with the youth, with seniors, with all of us, that perhaps that would be that pursuit, from that place of desperation to keep yourself youthful, maybe it would change our relationship to that. Maybe it would be a choice, but not coming from a place of feeling you're less worthy because. Is that making sense?
It is making sense.
Yeah.
Yes. I think it has to be an individual and group choice.
Yes. Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And we each bear that responsibility, not only of looking at ourselves in a positive light as we age, and also sort of refraining from those remarks about aging, negative remarks about aging. Refrain from sort of buying into that culture, and really sort of coming together to look at what we can do, whether it's at a business level, a community level, or an individual level.
Yes.
Yeah.
So what we can do, what are your thoughts about how we could start to change that dialogue within our culture? If there's, I don't know if you've thought about that. What kinds of things do you think are viable for us to start changing these attitudes?
I think the first one, which we mentioned, was not to be a victim.
Okay.
Don't use your age as an excuse for not learning something new or not doing something more energetic than perhaps you're used to.
Yes.
So stop being a victim. I think use it. Use your age. Own it.
Yes.
Feel good about the what you've accomplished so far. Look back. It might not, your lifespan may not have gone in the way that you thought it might. Think about what you have, what you've been through, how you've grown, how you've learned, and really sort of use that as your stepping stone in terms of promoting the maturity and wisdom that you carry, the experience you have.
I think you might have. You ever heard? I've heard a lot of people say when they're contemplating, let's say the average career change right now is 4. I think I've actually heard even higher than that at points, 6 career changes. One of the things I run into when people are unhappy in a job is that they feel stuck in it because of their age, or they'll say things, it's too late now, or they won't even entertain possibilities. I have a friend who at 42, 43, he decided to quit his job, and he went back to university from started at number 1, like Psychology 101, and worked his way for 10 years to get his PhD. He has absolutely no regrets for it. I have another friend, and she got her degree when she was 60. And I guess one of the things I will ask people is I'll say, okay, so if you're 40 and you do nothing now and you stay at this job you hate, 10 years is going to go by. But let's assume that you go to school, and what will happen 10 years from now? What will you wake up to? And they'll say, I'll wake up to having accomplished my degree. Those 10 years are going to pass in any case. They will pass.
Exactly.
So age doesn't matter, because you're either going to wake up having tried what you wanted to do or not done it at all, not even tried.
Right. And, today we're living, if you reach the age of 60, I think you've got a 55% chance of hitting 90.
Wow.
So if you reach the age of 60, you've still got a third of your life left.
Yes.
So there's a huge choice in, okay, I've hit 60, I've saved some money. Now what do I want to do? As you say, that career change, 20, 30 years ago, I think it was 3 career changes. And I think you're right, it's about 5 or 6 now.
Mm-hmm.
So, at 60, we can still make it. It's never too late. There's plenty of examples. You were talking about them earlier. There's a lot of opportunity to redefine life.
Yes.
I have a program I call that's called the Third Act that came from Ireland. And it basically looks at this. The first act is that nature-nurture period between time we were born and, our mid-20s. And that's really when we're dependent on others.
Yes.
The next piece, the second act between sort of the 25 and 55, 60 is, sort of that age where we're building a career, maybe growing a family, developing ourselves, and yet often we will have people dependent on us.
Right.
And now at 55, 60, it's sort of the first time when we are able to really focus on us and what we want.
Yes.
And, we're interdependent. So it's a lot of internal work. And there's huge and magnificent changes that we can make in our lives at that time if we have the will to and want to.
And right now, I can tell you, it seems really young for me at 50 for someone to saying that they're old, but that happens, right?
Oh, right.
Right. And yet that could be the most viable time to be actually really productive. Given
Very much so.
Yeah, you don't have children at that point. You don't have dependents. You know yourself more. I think that could be a really a positive period for somebody's life and of productivity. I know that I don't know if you've heard. I've heard Gabor Mate talking about this aging and seniors, and one of his ideas is that there's less valuing to it because we live in a society that values productivity and income earning, and that that is a determinant of worth to some extent, is how much someone can produce and what they can contribute. Where I think I would like in the ideal world that we can still strive for money, but I would really like us to separate sense of worth from whether someone is making money. If you actually look on a very side level, even women who have been caretaking of their children has not been given the value it deserved. It, of course, has changed over the years because it's not income. So that might be something very intrinsic to our society that we need to start shifting a bit, right?
Yes, very much so. We need to start thinking about the value of the individual, and retirement. We talk about retirement at this particular time of life as well, and yet if we look back, retirement is a very new concept in terms of man. It only came into being in the late 1800s.
Oh, wow. Okay.
When people were living sort of in their 50s.
Right.
It's really interesting, and it was sort of, they were living to their 50s. Maybe if they got to 62, it would be, that would be a really amazing thing.
Of course,
and so it's a relatively new concept when you think about it. And when I talk to people about retirement, I've given my old society. Now I'm getting old. It's time for me. And I look at them and think, and often will say, you can give a lot more to society. What are you going to do with this next? 30 years is over 10,000 days. Yeah. What are you going to do with this time? Rather than say, I'm going to play golf, or I'm going to play cards every night, etc. That goes a bit old, excuse the pun, And it's
Yes.
really thinking about, what do I want to do next?
Yes.
What would make sense to me?
Yes. And
Um, and yeah,
yeah,
go
no,
on.
I'm agreeing with you. Yes.
it, and it's really looking, really defining old age per se, or age
Yes.
per se, and sort of, with all the wisdom and everything now that I've accumulated, not necessarily money, but all the wisdom, the experience I've accumulated, how can I put that to use? How
Yeah.
can I keep my brain active? What do I want to do for the next 10 years? How do I want to feel for the next 10, 20, 30 years? Do I want to enter elder life, that
Yes.
sort of that fourth phase, healthy, or am I willing to continue a lifestyle that perhaps doesn't permit me to do every activity as I get to my late 70s, 80s?
Right. Right.
It's a choice we have.
Yes. I think it's starting to ask yourself some questions and making choices rather than uh, making it a given. And honestly, I can see why it would. I've done a couple shows on loneliness, which I remember a senior
Mm-hmm.
woman who is in her 90s, and I think she'd lost every family member other than some children that lived far away. Uh, she
Mm-hmm.
lost she lost a lot of people around her, right? And
Mm-hmm.
she was actually one of the more functional people in what you're saying as far as someone reaching a certain age. She continued, unlike other seniors that I've seen, being a contributor, being engaged, doing volunteer work, getting in physical activity. She didn't have that language, but unfortunately, because she didn't, um, she I don't know whether the friend she had just didn't have that kind of longevity for whatever reason, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's important to keep that language alive. And what I'd like to see, and I don't know if you have any thoughts of how we could do this, do you think? I know there are some authors, you talked about one author who's writing about it. How could we disseminate that to the general public? Because right now it seems like the niche groups that read on it or study it. But how can we, is there a way, do you think, Maeve? I don't know if it's how we could, so that we have a different conversation, so that we start looking at aging differently on a general population basis. Do you have any thoughts about that?
I think we have to change society's attitude towards aging. I think that's the first thing, to really adopt the idea that our elders um, continue to be useful people in society. Our government has to change their attitude. We've got rid of the retirement age, and yet still we see workplaces retiring or letting the older generation go because they're too expensive, because they don't apparently learn as quickly. So I think that's one of the things. The second thing I think we have to do is really look at people's independence. One of the things we know, and you've mentioned it, is that social isolation,
Yeah.
which affects mental health of the elderly.
Yes.
And when we look at places like Scandinavia, for example, in Japan, and how they have tackled the challenge of aging through keeping people in their homes longer. In the city of London a few years ago, they instigated a new program where students, they had gone through a whole stage of checks, but they then rented a room, a place at a very low rate from an elderly person who was still living on their own. And part of that agreement was that they would have one meal a day, one meal a week with the individual, and also just keep an eye on that person. And so there was companionship. There was also education, so that generation gap.
Right.
The education of somebody who'd lived through one of the wars and somebody who may not have had a grandparent to talk to.
Right.
In Scandinavia, there's totally different attitudes around activity, for example. So when somebody is looking at social services to come and help an aging person put on their shoes and socks because they can't bend,
right,
rather than just accepting that, looking and saying, okay, is it because this person has not been active and therefore they're losing flexibility, or is it really something else?
right.
And what they found was not only did they save tons of money by sending a personal trainer into the home to teach the elderly person and to help them with their flexibility, but also they found that the elderly people were not being as isolated because they could get around again.
And so this was a government-funded program?
This was a government-funded program.
Yeah.
And in the process of trying to fix the societal problem, they actually saved money.
Yes.
In Japan, you can get health credit, particularly if you're an older person, by supporting an elderly person, maybe taking them out for a drive or taking them shopping,
right,
or taking them to a health appointment. And you register as an aide. And it's something actually a lot of elderly, again, people do for each other. And so if you have a back problem and you've already got all of these health credits, you can get extra physio or extra massage or whatever you need. And again, it's that supporting people to continue their lives actively. There's so much there's so many opportunities that government and community can get involved in. The education of younger people about what happened during the last war, or right now, sort of growing up in the 50s. What was that like? There's opportunities for us as communities to perhaps bring in the elderly into schools.
Yes.
Help with cooking lessons where the elderly person maybe gives $5 or $10 and they get a meal together with the students. The students have learned to cook and they get something to take them home. So there's lots of creative ways to support the elderly. And then in terms of ourselves as growing old, we need to remember to I think, commit to being not just active, but also social.
Yes, yes.
We don't realize often, and it's a terrible time in COVID to say that we don't realize how isolated we become if we're not out and about, whether it's joining a walking club or playing cards. I think one of the biggest things that we can do right now is see people on Zoom or Facebook or one of those social media channels, meet your friends there for a one-on-one chat at least once a week, to chat, to read books, to when we look at keeping our brain active.
Yes, yes.
It's really sort of learning new things, learning a language.
Oh, huge, huge. And Annette Beniel actually is an author who's published, and she's a brain scientist. She did a book, Thriving as We Age. I can't remember the actual title. It was many years ago that I interviewed her. And you can actually find Annette Beniel. I think she's been on TED Talks. She has some amazing brain stories that she's and how she's helped not only the young people, But one of the things she really talks about is in the brain, we may not, there's actually at 25, we stop producing brain nerves. So the nervous system in the brains do stop developing, or
Mm-hmm.
at least the primary formation is at 25 years of age. And then from that point on, it starts to decrease. So we may
Mm-hmm.
not grow new nerves in the brain, but what we do is we can have new connections. And that when we're learning something new in the brain, it actually creates a stimulation. That is what allows us to feel that we're thriving, is because we're moving out of the realm of habit, and now we have new neural connections developing, and that
Mm-hmm.
contributes to what makes us feel alive, makes us feel
Right.
energy. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And in that book that I was talking about by Dr. Gupta, it was exactly that,
Hmm.
growing new neural pathways by learning new things. It's not just keeping at the crossword puzzle. It's
Totally.
more doing the crossword puzzle and learning a new language, or
Yes.
sort of doing a number of different things uh, to keep our brains active.
Yes.
And there's so many opportunities. I remember a woman who, again, in her 90s, decided to um, to celebrate her 90th birthday. She went on a safari to Africa, and she she said that she was the oldest person on that safari, and she basically participated in zip lining. That was it. She participated in zip lining, and she asked the fellow who was managing the zip line what was the oldest person that he'd had on the zip line. And he said somebody in their 70s. So she demanded a second ride because she was 90, going on 91.
That's hilarious. Well, good for
And
her.
I just
So, yeah.
exactly. And she was active. She volunteered to help children in the schools with their reading if they were having reading difficulty, and English was her second language. And
Yes.
she also volunteered in the community as well. So kept herself active and busy.
Yes.
You know, even saying, okay, I'm 65, 67, what kind of part-time job could I do? Even if it's only
Yes.
1 day a week, where you're out meeting people in community.
Yeah.
Um, it's really about not
Important.
just,
Yeah.
yeah, it's so important.
Yeah.
And, we have this attitude that, oh, I've hit 65, I'm old. And
Yeah.
I'm sure you know people who have made that decision
Yes.
that they're
Absolutely.
old,
Yes.
and overnight
Yes.
they've aged 10, 15 years.
Yes. The actual belief, there was a study that was an interesting one that Lee Poulos, a psychologist, he himself is retired, but he worked until he was 90.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a study where they took a group of seniors, they brought him into an environment that resembled, uh, the years when they were young. They
Mm-hmm.
created sort of this, manufactured this historical kind of experience where they went back in time to, let's say, when they were in their 20s or 30s, and for that week they engaged in that universe as if they were younger people. And what they did was
Mm-hmm.
they did measurements of their reactions times and memories prior to that engagement in the study, and then they looked at did some testing of physiological responses subsequent to that, and they found that following that, they had quicker reactions times, their memories were better, they were overall functioning better. So I find that fascinating, that as they immerse themselves in kind of uh, going back in time experience of themselves as if they were younger, that it actually improved their physiology.
I remember that study. Yes, it was great. It was just eye-opening, I think, for the scientists to see that happen. There's actually a movie called, I think it's called The Intern, with Robert De Niro,
Okay.
where he at 70, he's a gentleman who is bored in retirement. So at 70, goes and becomes an intern in a tech marketing firm. It's a very nice movie. It's actually a lovely movie, and it speaks to exactly this: the aging process. It demonstrates the prejudice towards somebody who is older, and also how he overcame some of that and sort of built his own little circle of influence using his wisdom and experience in another life.
Wow. I actually remember seeing the ad to that. What is the name of that movie again?
I think it's called The Intern.
The Intern. Okay. I think that would be a great movie to see. And I wrote it down, so I'm going to watch it because I find those stories, those through lines very fascinating. And, what I hope, Maeve, is, what I would like to see, I think it'd be great to see some more media coverage with where government funded perhaps, that is really relaying this message to the public in general. I think somehow we have to get that out to the population on a large scale. I love that we have, and I think, of course, talking about it, podcasts great and books are great. I'd like it to be more of the popular mainstream. Do you know what I'm saying? Just so that it gets out to the young people who might not gravitate to reading a book about seniors or getting older. Let's find a way so that we can, because I do think there's a possibility for this to actually save money, because as we get older, if we change that inner dialogue, we take more responsibility for our own physical well-being, for our health, that you're going to have fewer health issues, right?
Very much so. And, that I think is the number one thing that people have to do, is start to take responsibility for their health.
Yes.
We need to look at our sort of physical activities or lack thereof. And it's so simple. A walk is so simple. It doesn't need anything special.
No.
Our mental activities, sort of look at learning something new every month, or trying something different every month.
Yeah.
We need to look at our own attitudes towards and face our fears.
Absolutely,
I'm a
face
great
fears.
person.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I really think that standing those fears down is so important to mental health. And we also need to have increased support in our organizations.
Yes.
So that people who want to work or wish to work past traditional retirement age can do so. So,
yes,
when you think about organizations, the amount of intellectual capital that they lose when a person retires is huge.
Yes.
If they, when we look at how many people are due to retire over the next few years, there's going to be a huge gap in organizations. And one of the ways that they could creatively support older workers while at the same time training new leaders is really in looking at sort of, if somebody wants to work 3 days a week, how can we manage that? Or what are the opportunities for this person to mentor a group of new leaders or young leaders?
Yes.
There's often creative ways that our organizations haven't looked at. And some are beginning to look at those opportunities. I think it's us, it's working with our organizations, and it's government. It's sort of at all different levels.
I think that would be so amazing, and I that would be so helpful, and I think that once we start, I always like to tell people we are actually talking, even though I don't know if the younger generation might be listening to this. We're not talking about other people. We're talking about you, everybody who is listening to this. You are not separate from these older seniors. We will eventually, in time, become that. So the more we can all, at all ages, start changing that dialogue about getting older, and the greater chance that we're going to have a more vital older population. And you had a statistic about Canada, and I think this is why it matters, right? Because we're going to have increasing seniors as time goes on. Did you have some stats to share there?
Well, I know in Canada, and I can't find the specific stats. I know the Island Health, in fact, we have more seniors in Island Health than we have younger people.
Yes.
So in Canada, I think it was 2016, 17, there were more people over the age of 65 than there were young people under the age of 15.
Yeah, amazing.
Which, as we get older, we do need more support in certain ways.
Yes.
And, when we look at that younger population, we've got to also understand that the expectation is that they will be there to care for us, as their children and grandchildren will be there to care for them.
Yes.
Yeah. So, it's really recognizing and supporting caregivers, particularly caregivers in the home, because it's one of those roles that we really don't give enough recognition to,
Yes.
I think.
Yeah.
The most important thing for us is really working on ourselves and our bias toward aging.
Yes.
I think we're often we're complicit in our own marginalization.
We are. Absolutely, we are. It's like being brought up in a certain negative environment, which I think exists out there, right? And we absorb it, and it gets perpetuated, right? So somewhere we need to draw that line and start thinking differently. And I think a show like this is a great start. What do you think?
It is. I think it's a wonderful start.
Yeah.
I think some of the ideas we've discussed can support people in looking at themselves. And if we change the way we look at aging, whatever age we are right now, and the younger the better, it changes how we see ourselves as we age.
Yes.
It also changes how we perceive others.
Yes. And one thing I do say to people is even if I know in the more senior generation, my mother's generation, for example, exercise wasn't as emphasized, and I know that it is changing now, and over the years it's become really clearly articulated how important it is. But it is never too late to start, and if you've not been someone who's done it, start small. I'm like, we can be, because I certainly have heard people say, "Oh, I've never done it before. I'm not going to start now," right? And the truth is, we can start at any time, and I think it's never too late to get started. If we have 20 years, 30 years left to our life, it's worth every small increment we make is going to make a difference, I think.
Right. And you know me, I believe in tiny steps, and every tiny step moves you towards that goal. So if you're not used to doing anything, go for a walk around the block. Start with that.
Absolutely.
cut out one of those fast food meals you might eat, or that cream pie or slice of cake with your coffee every
Yes.
week. Tiny little steps
Well,
go to improve your overall health.
I've used this, inch by inch, it's a cinch, yard by yard makes it hard. There's when I was doing my running and coaching for running, when I was doing running more frequently, one of the things that my coach would often, our coach, the team's coach would often say is, which we know is what fires together, wires together. And so that, but one of the things he really emphasized, which I really loved, is he said, we need to, if, for example, when you're starting to starting to run, it might not be for everybody, but one thing he said is, even if it's 15 minutes, he said, because if you enjoy that 15 minutes, the chances are that now you're developing a positive association with that activity, and you'll want to do it again, and you'll want to do it again. And so in doing the small activities, we're actually, and keeping the fun in it, not making it too, keeping the associations around work, that we can ensure that we're going to want to keep engaged in it. And so I'm kind of mirroring back what you just said, but from a more brain kind of concept of it, right? Yeah.
Yep. There's a wonderful book, and me and my books, called Atomic Habits by James Clear. And he talks about, so you want to go to the gym and start exercising. And the first step is deciding on what days you want to go to the gym, and literally taking your car, driving, sitting there for a minute, and then driving home. That's it for the first week or two.
Oh, wow. Love it. I love it. I'm going to take a look at that book, because it's exactly what I totally think is important for people to understand, right? That's how we do it.
Yeah. That's how we start. Yep.
Well, that's amazing. Thank you very much. I think this has been a great conversation about ageism, and hopefully we're ending off on a more positive note, because I think if we take that initiative ourselves, we are the future, and we can take those changes right. If we make those changes right now, it will eventually lead us to, I hope, a more vibrant, and since we're going to live longer, let's make the best of those extra years we got, right?
Exactly. Who wants to be a teenager or 20 anymore?
Oh, I know. That's it, right? So, Maeve, thank you. I appreciate you very much. I appreciate your wisdom and what you've shared with us today. I don't know if there's any, did I miss anything? Anything else you'd like to close off with for the day?
I think you've done it. It's really believing in ourselves, and believing in our age as an advantage, our experience and wisdom as an advantage, not a liability.
Yes. I love it. Yeah, keeps me motivated. Yeah, and Dylan, hey Dylan, we're going to be wrapping up now. So thanks for listening in. And
yeah, that was awesome.
Yeah. So Maeve, who knows, maybe we'll have another conversation in the future, but I certainly enjoyed this one.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, it was fun. Thank you very much. I loved everything we talked about. So we will talk again, Maeve. Thank you so much. And I want to thank listeners out there tuning in, or do we say tuning in? Until next time, I hope you take care of yourselves and look to the future with a little bit more hope and optimism, no matter how old you are. All the best to you. Thank you, and take good care.